Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Continuing Education, SOCE, Master's Degree Programs, Master of Science, Food Nutrition, MSc DFSM, Revised. Second year, MFN 005 Clinical Therapeutic Nutrition. Unit 11 Nutritional Management of Coronary Heart Diseases. 11.1 Introduction. In the previous unit, you must have realized that nutrition is a basic prerequisite for maintaining a desirable body weight and that diet has a major role in the prevention and treatment of several degenerative diseases. We have learned that overweight can be one of the risk factors for cardiovascular disease, CVD. Risk factors, as we know, are conditions and habits that have been demonstrated to be associated with the increased probability of a disease. We will study about cardiovascular diseases in this unit and learn about the genetic and environmental factors which lead to elevated serum lipids, elevated blood pressure, and development of other clinical manifestations associated with coronary artery disease, CAD. This unit will also elaborate upon the dietary management of various forms of heart disease. Objectives. After studying this unit, you will be able to describe the various forms of coronary heart diseases, enumerate the risk factors, genetic and environmental, in causation of CHD, discuss the etiology, symptoms, as well as complications of various forms of heart diseases, elaborate on the objectives of dietary management and the nutrition care process, and explain the treatment, management, and prevention of disease with emphasis on behavior modification. 11.2 Coronary heart diseases, CHD. Coronary heart disease is a broad term comprising of a spectrum of diseases associated with disorders of the circulation, heart muscles, or the vessels of the heart in particular. We all come across certain common terms associated with heart disease which are very often used interchangeably. You must have heard of terms such as coronary heart disease, coronary artery disease, ischemic heart disease being used synonymously. But have you ever realized that they do not mean exactly the same? Well, the term coronary heart disease, as discussed above, encompasses all the diseases of the heart, i.e., those associated with the blood circulation as well as the structure. Coronary artery disease, CAD, refers to diseases of the arteries, generally resulting from blockage of the arteries. Ischemic heart diseases, IHD, are usually a consequence of coronary artery diseases such as myocardial infarction is a consequence of progressive atherosclerosis. We shall be using these terms in this unit. The diseases of the heart mentioned above can be congenital or acquired. In this unit, we shall discuss about the acquired forms of CHDI, those which develop as a result of dietary errors or sedentary lifestyle practices. The major forms include dyslipidemias, atherosclerosis, hypertension, angina pectoris, myocardial infarction, congestive cardiac failure, and rheumatic heart disease. The cardiovascular diseases are of prime importance as we see that the incidence of these diseases is rising at an enormous rate, are going to account for an appreciable proportion of mortality and morbidity in the adults and now appearing in the young. Table 11.1 highlights briefly the various types of CHD. Table 11.1 Common disorders and complications of coronary heart diseases, CHD. Disorders, complications of CHD definition. Dyslipidemia, abnormal lipid levels in the blood. Atherosclerosis, a thickening and narrowing of the walls of the large and medium-sized blood vessels, caused due elevated to lipids and cholesterol. Hypertension, higher than normal blood pressure. Angina pectoris, a characteristic pain or discomfort in the chest. Myocardial infarction, an area of necrosis, dying dead cells of the myocardium in a tissue. Congestive cardiac failure, a clinical syndrome caused by heart disease, characterized by breathlessness, chest pain, and abnormal sodium and water retention. Rheumatoid heart disease, RHD, a complication of rheumatic fever and occurs after attacks of this fever. We begin our discussion on CHD by studying about the prevalence, etiology, and pathophysiology of the disease condition. 1.2.1 Prevalence. Incidence of obesity, diabetes, and CHD is increasing in India in almost all age groups. At present, obesity, which is a major risk factor for hyperlipidemia and atherosclerosis, is present in 15% of the rural and 31.3% of urban population, NFHS 4, 2015-16. This is so because urban population is more prosperous, lead a sedentary lifestyle and generally prefer consuming refined foodstuffs. Hypertension, high blood pressure. A risk factor for IHD is prevalent in 6 to 10% rural and 7 to 11% urban population, NFHS 4, 2015-16. Similar is the situation with diabetes mellitus, which is closely associated with cardiomyopathies, diseases of cardiac muscles, such as congestive heart failure. But why is the incidence of coronary heart diseases increasing at a rapid rate every year? Are there any factors which may predispose Asians, particularly Indians, to an early onset of heart diseases? Let us read further to learn about the causative factors associated with the development of heart diseases in various age groups. 1.2.2 Etiology, cardiovascular risk factors. It must be coming in your mind several times that why do some people suffer from heart disease while others do not? Well, the most obvious reason is that they are more susceptible due to the presence of certain risk factors. Now, what is a risk factor and what are the risk factors for CHD? The factors that play a role in causing or increasing the risk of getting the cardiovascular disease are called risk factors. Figure 11.1 illustrates these risk factors. As you may have noticed in the figure, these factors are classified as modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors. Modifiable risk factors are those which we have control over. For example, obesity, smoking, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, physical inactivity, etc. By themselves, they are major risk factors which increase our risk of developing CHD. Positive healthy living, smoke-free air, good nutrition, regular physical activity, and supportive living and working environments can go a long way in preventing CHD. Non-modifiable risk factors are those that we have no control over, such as hereditary, age, gender, etc. We will talk about some of these common risk factors in the following text. Risk factors. Modifiable risk factors. 1. Behavioral. Smoking. Sedentary lifestyle habits. Dietary errors. 2. Physiological. Hyperlipidemia. Hypertension. Obesity. Diabetes mellitus. Hyperuricemia and gout. Fibrinogen. Platelet aggregation. Lipoprotein A. Homocysteine levels. Low birth weight. 3. Psychological. Stress. Low socioeconomic strata. Type A personality. 4. Geographic. Soft drinking water. Cold weather. Non-modifiable risk factors. 1. Age. 2. Sex. 3. Heredity. 4. Endomorphic body build. 1. Family history. People who already have the disease in their family are more prone to getting heart disease. Genetic factors greatly influence the risk of developing premature cardiovascular diseases. 2. Obesity. As you know, obesity or excessive weight is the primary cause of cardiovascular disease. It is an independent risk factor for heart disease. Obesity in generally associated with elevated triglyceride, elevated low-density lipids, increased blood pressure and impaired glucose tolerance. Weight reduction improves these abnormalities, keeping the body mass index within the normal range, 18.5 to 24.9, can be helpful in retarding the onset of CAD. Remember, we read about BMI in Unit 9. Further, android form of obesity makes us more prone to heart diseases as compared to the gynoid form of obesity. Thus, abdominal fat is considered more harmful than fat on the hips, as you may recall studying in Unit 9. This can be measured by waist-hip ratio, where normal wear is 0.85 for females and 1.0 for males. 3. Hypertension or high blood pressure. It is also one of the risk factors of cardiovascular disease and is frequently accompanied by hyperlipidemia, excess lipids in the blood. Increased coronary artery wall tension is believed to accelerate the atherosclerotic process by stimulating arterial smooth muscle cell hyperplasia and hypertrophy with resultant fibromuscular thickening. 4. Diabetes. Sustained hyperglycemia is associated with tissue damage and cardiomyopathies. You shall study about diabetes and its association with cardiovascular diseases in the next unit. Control of blood glucose levels is important to prevent heart disease. 5. Age. Earlier, men less than 55 years were more prone, but now heart disease has caught up with a younger age group of 30 years also. In fact, autopsy studies have indicated that the process of atherosclerosis can begin as early as at 2 years of age and that the sites of blockage may get predetermined in the womb of hypercholesterolemic women. 6. Smoking and tobacco. Cigarette smoking and tobacco is a major independent risk factor for myocardial infarction and cardiac failure. Coronary artery disease has been seen in 80% of the smokers. Inhaling nicotine, carbon monoxide and various other pollutants narrow the coronary arteries, thus reducing the blood flow to the heart muscle. It deserves special attention in the prevention of cardiovascular disease. 7. Alcohol. Excessive amount of alcohol is also a risk factor. Alcohol shows a positive relationship between the amount of alcohol consumed and blood pressure levels, hence it is best to avoid it or take it in moderation. 8. Lack of physical activity. Sedentary and unexercised people are more prone to CVD. 9. Syndrome X is a cluster of conditions such as central abdominal obesity, diabetes, dyslipidemia or hypertension with elevated triglycerides, decreased HDL and blood sugar abnormalities, all harmful for cardiovascular disease. 10. Plasma fibrinogen and lipoprotein. A plasma fibrinogen is closely associated with blockage in the arteries due to blood clot formation. Serum lipoprotein A, which is a genetically inherited mutant of plasminogen, is a discriminant marker of early, asymptomatic atherosclerotic plaques in the carotid arteries and aorta of hypercholesterolemic individuals. 11. Psychological, social, cultural, and religious factors indirectly influence the risk of cardiovascular diseases by their effects on kind of food and quantity of food consumed, cigarette and alcohol consumed, highly competitive job stress, and physical exercise. People who are impatient, workaholic, type A personalities can cause greater harmful effects on the heart and its vessels. In the discussion above, we have highlighted the most common risk factors which are associated with heart diseases. It would be good to note here that new risk factors are being identified every day. Risk factors such as viral infections, low birth weight, and blood homocysteine levels are currently being investigated to understand the high prevalence rate in the urban poor of the developing nations and the early onset of CHD. Let us now study about the basic disease process in brief. 1.2.3 Pathophysiology of CHD. We all know that heart attack, i.e., myocardial infarction, is not the beginning but a last stage representing acute clinical manifestation of CHD. Several clinical trials and autopsy studies have indicated that the process of developing atherosclerotic lesions can begin as early as during infancy and that it may take several decades for the lesions to develop into fatty streaks and fibrous plaques that ultimately cause stenosis, complete blockage of the arteries, diffuse intimal thickening during infancy, which is considered to be a normal physiological and not a pathological process, can result in the initialization of early clinical manifestations which may appear in the smooth muscle cell layer between the endothelium and the internal elastic lamina. These lesions may progress and develop into fatty streaks to reach their maximum extent in the aortas over a period of 2 decades among individuals having elevated cholesterol and/or triglyceride levels. There is also focal proliferation of smooth muscle cells which are termed as gelatinous lesions because they have a low lipid but high water content. Some of these lesions may become large and develop a grayish opaque center while remaining soft and translucent around the edges. These are referred to as the transitional lesions. These lesions at times develop a fibrous cap with atheromatous lipids in the center and are known as fibrous plaques. Such fibrous plaques may coalesce together, resulting in blockage of the arteries and hence reduced flow of blood to the tissues. The irritating presence of plaques may cause injury to the intima of the arteries, which may result in thrombosis. Myocardial infarction, cerebral stroke, is the ultimate result of stenosis in the arteries. In the next section, we shall discuss about the role of different types of heart diseases, their symptoms, treatment, and dietary management. But before we go on to this topic, let us recapitulate what we have learned so far. 11.3 Common disorders of coronary heart diseases and their management. In this section, we shall deal with different types of heart diseases, their etiology, symptoms, complications, as well as nutrition and dietary management goals. We shall begin our discussions with dyslipidemia, hyperlipidemia, which are directly and most closely associated with the development of atherosclerosis. Subsequently, we shall learn about hypertension, angina pectoris, myocardial infarction, congestive cardiac failure, and rheumatic heart diseases. However, the planning of diets for these diseases Conditions shall be taken up in the practical manual MFNL 005. So here let us begin our discussion with dyslipidemia. 1.3.1 Dyslipidemia or hyperlipidemia. It has been known for over 5 decades now that dyslipidemia is associated with increased severity and prevalence of atherosclerosis. Dyslipidemia is frequently seen in the form of increased concentration of either cholesterol or the triglycerides or frequently the both. There are several types of blood lipid disorders which hold different risks and require somewhat different treatment methods. The proportions and total amounts of specific lipoproteins present in the blood are used in diagnosing hyperlipidemia. The characteristics, as well as classification of the lipoprotein disorders have been given by Fredrickson et al., 1967. Also, you would recall reading about this in Nutritional Biochemistry course, MFN 002, in Unit 7. We suggest you to go back to Unit 7 and refresh yourself on the classification of major lipid disorders and their characteristics. However, for a quick recapitulation, we have elucidated the characteristics of some important lipoproteins here. Blood lipids, cholesterol, triglycerides and phospholipids, being insoluble in blood, need a ship to travel in our body. It therefore usually gets bound to proteins and form complex particles called lipoproteins which vary in size, composition and density. There are 5 classes of lipoproteins in the blood. These include 1. Chylomicrons. These are formed in the intestines when a fatty meal is taken. These pass into the blood through the lymphatics. It contains nearly 90% of triglycerides and 5% cholesterol. 2. Very low density lipoproteins, VLDL. These are produced by the liver and are the main transporters of triglycerides. VLDL generates most of the LDL in the plasma. It contains about 60% of triglycerides and 10% cholesterol. 3. Intermediary density lipoprotein, IDL. This is rich in cholesterol and triglyceride. It contains about 40% of triglycerides and 10% cholesterol. 4. Low density lipoproteins, LDL. This type of lipoprotein is viewed as most atherogenic of all the lipoproteins, but it just serves as a factor among many for developing cardiovascular diseases. It has 10% of triglycerides and 45% of cholesterol. 5. High-density lipoprotein, HDL. The high HDL content is associated with decrease in the risk of atherosclerosis because it takes excess cholesterol from body to liver. It contains about 3% triglycerides and 20% cholesterol. Besides these lipoproteins, the other parameters which are of interest in CHD include total cholesterol. Serum total cholesterol equals the sum of HDL cholesterol, HDLC, VLDL cholesterol, VLDLC, and LDL cholesterol, LDLC. High level of cholesterol is associated with a high risk of atherosclerosis. But recent evidence suggests that cholesterol alone is not precipitating factor for CVD risk. Triglycerides. The triglyceride-rich lipoproteins include chylomicrons, VLDL, and intermediate density lipoproteins, IDL. Their levels increase by many factors, such as excess calories, fat, carbohydrates, physical inactivity, cigarette smoking, and alcohol. Indians are genetically more susceptible to developing hypertriglyceridemia as compared to Europeans, primarily due to our cereal-based diets. Apoproteins. Apoproteins are closely related to lipids as they maintain the solution of lipoprotein lipids in plasma. Measurement of apoprotein levels aids in diagnosing disorders of lipids and preventing the risk of cardiovascular disease. The apoproteins include AI, AII, B100, B48CI, CII, CIII, D, and E. The apoproteins AI and AII are associated with HDL, the good lipoprotein, and the rest are associated with not so good lipoproteins. It would be interesting to note here that the clinical reports of most cardiac patients would indicate the levels of the above-mentioned parameters. As a dietitian, you should be able to interpret and utilize this information for planning the dietary regime of the patient. For your reference, the normal and elevated levels, indicative of disease condition, for some of these parameters are given in box 11.1. Look at the screen. Next, we move on to the etiology or the factors leading specifically to hyperlipidemia or specific types of lipoproteins. You would find the factors elaborated below are the same discussed earlier under subsection 1.1.2.2. Etiology. The causative factors of dyslipidemia, hyperlipidemia may be environmental, dietary, lifestyle, genetic, or secondary to certain disease conditions or drugs. We have already studied these, but let us briefly touch upon them. 1. Environmental factors. These include diets high in saturated fats, excessive calorie intake, alcohol intake, and sedentary lifestyle. A change in diet and lifestyle can help to normalize elevated blood lipid levels. 2. Genetic defects. These led to familial hyperlipidemia. In such cases, the lipid levels may be alarmingly high and risk of CHD very high. Myocardial infarction can occur within the first 2 decades of life. Dietary modifications along with drug therapy are beneficial. 3. Hyperlipidemia secondary to other conditions. The disorders that upset lipid metabolism include poorly controlled diabetes mellitus, kidney disease, nephrosis, and end-stage renal disease, liver disease, hypothyroidism, and use of drugs like oral contraceptives, thiazide diuretics, corticosteroids could be a cause of the lipid imbalances. We will now proceed over to the common symptoms elicited with elevated serum cholesterol and triglycerides levels in the blood. Symptoms. The main symptom is presence of xanthoma. This is a yellowish swelling, nodule or plaque in the skin resulting from deposits of fat. There are various types of xanthoma. For example, in type 2B, the xanthoma may be on the hand, buttocks, knees, upper eyelids. In type 3, the planar xanthomas may be seen in the creases of the palms of hands and fingers. In type 5, the xanthoma may be present on the back of the neck or buttocks. Complications. The complications include pancreatitis, progressive atherosclerosis, or asymptomatic coronary disease. We shall be studying about this in the next section. Excess of triglycerides, hypertriglyceridemia, and cholesterol, hypercholesterolemia, are the usual problems for increase in very low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, VLDLC. Low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, LDLC, levels. The following are possible causes of elevated triglycerides and cholesterol and reduced HDLC levels. Possible causes of elevated triglycerides: obesity, alcohol, uncontrolled diabetes, hypothyroidism, genetic liver disease, drugs. Possible causes of elevated cholesterol: excess fat in the diet, saturated and cholesterol, overweight, obesity. Possible causes of reduced serum HDL levels: cigarette smoking, hypertriglyceridemia, obesity, genetic factors, lack of exercise, uncontrolled diabetes, drugs, progestational agents, steroids, etc., hypothyroidism, liver disease. Before moving towards the dietary management of hyperlipidemia, preventive measures are equally important. Let's discuss about some of them. Preventive measures. There are general recommendations to prevent heart attack from hyperlipidemia. Most important of that is adopting healthier lifestyle practices, which includes physical activity and healthy dietary intake, which is discussed further in dietary management. Of dyslipidemia, avoiding smoking, tobacco and alcohol intake. Apart from these practices, it is always advisable to get your lipid profile tested after regular intervals so that timely precautionary measures can be taken. Now let us proceed towards the dietary management of hyperlipidemia. Treatment and management of dyslipidemia, hyperlipidemia. Maintenance of blood lipids within the normal range is the most essential objective to prevent the onset progression of atherosclerosis. According to the National Cholesterol Education Program, NCEP, USA, it is pertinent to lay stress on dietary and lifestyle modifications to control the manifestations associated with elevated lipids, whether or not the patient is on drug therapy. Let us now proceed over to the dietary management of hyperlipidemia and understand the role of nutrients in increasing blood lipids, except HDL-C and triglyceride levels. We will begin with identification of objectives for the nutritional care process. Goals of dietary treatment. The goals of dietary management, alone or conjunction with exercise or with lipid lowering drugs, are to reduce excess of the total fat, saturated fat and cholesterol intake. This is an attempt to reduce total cholesterol, LDL and triglyceride levels, thus also reducing the risk of atherosclerosis and modifying its progression in subjects with the disease. 2018 Guidelines on the Management of Blood Cholesterol emphasized on adequate intake of following essentials in a healthy diet: vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, legumes and nuts, low-fat dairy products, low-fat poultry without the skin, fish and seafood, non-tropical vegetable oils. From the above points, it can be concluded that patients should limit their intake of saturated and trans fat, sweets, sugar-sweetened beverages, and red meats. So let us start with dietary fats. Dietary fats. There is a consistent support for the hypothesis that both the quantity and quality of fat are directly associated with the elevation of most blood lipids, particularly LDL-C. It has largely been observed that high intake of fat, particularly saturated fat, results in elevation of serum total cholesterol, particularly LDL-C. The foods that we consume contain cholesterol, saturated, monosaturated, and polyunsaturated fatty acids. They may be invisible like fats present in various foods or visible like fats used in cooking, etc. Let us learn about each of these in detail. We will begin with dietary cholesterol. A. Cholesterol. It is a natural component of foods such as mutton, pork, ham, sausages, lamb, chicken, eggs, yellow, whole milk, cheese, ice cream, butter, and desi ghee. Cholesterol is present only in animal kingdom and does not exist in vegetable kingdom. Increased cholesterol in blood is called hypercholesterolemia, which leads to atherosclerosis. Foods rich in cholesterol: mutton, pork, ham, sausages, lamb, chicken, egg, yellow, glandular meat, brain, liver and kidneys, whole milk, cheese, ice cream, butter, desi B. B. Saturated fatty acids, SFA. These are found mostly in animal fats as white, marble-like solid at room temperature. Red meats are rich in it. Other sources of saturated fats are milk fat, butter, ghee, coconut oil, palm oil, margarine and hydrogenated fats, vanaspati. These saturated fats in the diet also give rise to high LDL, thus leading to atherosclerosis. The three saturated fatty acids lauric acid, myristic acid, and palmitic acids increase cholesterol levels. The energy provided from saturated fats should always be less than 10% of the total calories. Foods rich in saturated fatty acids, SFA. Milk fat, butter, pure ghee, coconut oil, palm oil, margarine, vanaspati, red meats. Mutton. C. Monounsaturated fats, MUFA. These are liquid at room temperature, the highest food source being olive oil, canola oil, rapeseed oil, to some extent mustard oil. MUFA is an excellent fat as it reduces the LDL levels and increases the good HDL levels and cholesterol, thus preventing atherosclerosis. Oleic acid is a monounsaturated fatty acid of great clinical relevance. Oils high in monounsaturated fatty acid, MUFA. Canola oil, olive oil and rapeseed oil. D. Polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFA. These are also liquid at room temperature. There are two main types of dietary PUFAs of significance. A. Linoleic acids, LaN6, present in good amounts in safflower, sunflower, corn and sesame oil. B. Alpha-linolenic, Alna N3, fish oils, to some extent olive oil, mustard and rapeseed oil. The ratio of N6, N3 between 5 to 10 is considered healthy. This can be obtained by using a mixture of two oils. Combination of safflower, corn, sunflower or sesame oil. Rich in N6, with equal portions of mustard oil or rapeseed oil, rich source of N3, can give a ratio between 5 to 10. This is not atherogenic and hence healthy for the heart. Fish oils and fish also contain N3 and are beneficial for the heart as they decrease plasma triglycerides. Table 11.2 enlists the rich sources of PUFA. Table 11.2 Rich sources of polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFA. Rich in N6, linoleic acid. Safflower, sunflower, sesame, corn oil. Rich in N3, alpha-linolenic acid. Canola, olive oil, rapeseed oil, mustard oil, soybean oil, fish oil, mackerel, sardines, trout and tuna, wheat, bajra. Green leafy vegetables, methi, mustard, rye, almonds, black gram, cowpea, lobia, rajma and soya. Monounsaturated fatty acids have a plasma cholesterol lowering effect. Polyunsaturated fatty acids also have a cholesterol decreasing effect. Omega-3 fatty acids are excellent for the heart as they 1. Reduce platelet aggregation and monocyte adherence. 2. Modify plasma lipids and 3. Lower blood pressure. To sum up, we now know that saturated fats and dietary cholesterol increase the level of LDL and cholesterol in the blood. If there is a decrease of 1% calories from SFA, the blood cholesterol level decreases by 3 mg per dl. The monounsaturated fatty acids, MUFA, are good as they decrease the LDL levels and cholesterol in the blood. The polyunsaturated fats, PUFA, decrease LDL levels. Thus, the energy provided from fats should remain less than 30% of the total calories, of which saturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids each should provide less than 10% of the total calories, while monounsaturated fatty acids may provide the remaining i.e. greater than 10% of the total calories. Table 11.3 gives the composition of various fatty acid in foods to help you gain more knowledge regarding fatty acids. This would also help you to choose the type of foods low in saturated fats and rich in N6 and N3 polyunsaturated fats. Let us learn about an important type of fat, which has an important place in the Indian diets in view of its characteristic flavor and excellent shortening properties, which improves the texture and acceptability of several foods. You must have guessed it right. It is available in the Indian market in the form of Vanaspati, which is a type of hydrogenated fat. Hydrogenated fat. All Vanaspati preparations are the result of hydrogenation of oils, where unsaturated fat is converted to saturated fat for its flavor and long shelf life. This is often preferred by housewives as it is an imitation of pure ghee. However, it is saturated in nature and contains trans fatty acids. Trans fatty acids are known to raise LDL in blood, thus enhancing atherosclerosis. This is the reason why hydrogenated fats are harmful to the heart. Next, we will proceed to the type and quality of carbohydrates, which can help in controlling hyperlipidemia. Simple carbohydrates, as we know when consumed above, the requirements can result in elevated levels of VLDLC and triglycerides. Carbohydrates, as you have already read that carbohydrates provide 4 kcal of energy in our diets. Since we take large amounts of carbohydrates, these provide 60 to 70% of our total calorie needs of the body. If taken in excess, it is converted to fat in the body. You would recall reading about different types of carbohydrates that form an essential part of our diet. Let us brush up our knowledge about these in this subsection and find out the role of carbohydrates in heart diseases. The dietary sources of carbohydrates are as follows. 1. Monosaccharides. You are aware that monosaccharides exist mainly as glucose and fructose in our diets. Fruits, vegetable, honey, jaggery are good sources of monosaccharides. 2. Disaccharides. Sucrose, common known as sugar, is the commonest of them. All are present in table sugar. Lactose is found naturally in milk and milk products. Maltose is the product of hydrolysis of starch and is found in sprouted wheat and barley. 3. Oligosaccharides. These are found in plant seeds, mainly legumes, beans, and peas. 4. Polysaccharides. Starch is one of the main carbohydrates found in our diets and comes from cereals, potato, bananas, etc. Next, let us get to know about their role. Role of carbohydrates. It is important to know about these carbohydrates as they all differ in their digestive properties. The rate of absorption is variable. Monosaccharides get absorbed the fastest, and polysaccharides get absorbed the slowest. This is because polysaccharides contain more fiber. The latter are good for many disorders like intestinal diseases, diabetes, and even cardiac problems. Fiber is beneficial for cardiovascular disease and is found as water-insoluble and water-soluble type. Soluble fibers like pectins, gums, and mucilages have shown reduction in cholesterol levels. Intake of about 20 to 40 g of soluble fiber has proven to be beneficial. As you can see, legumes, oats, whole grains, fruits, apples, pears, and citrus fruits, and vegetables, along with psyllium, isabgol, are a rich source of soluble fiber. Soya beans are a good source of fiber, and soya proteins have estrogenic effect, which causes of lipid lowering. A recent analysis of 38 completed trials showed the beneficial effects of soya protein to be in the amount of 47 g-day. Proteins, while the quantity of protein does not impose any significant impact on the serum lipoproteins, it is the quality of protein which may be of significance. Patients should be advised to consume plant origin proteins over those of animal origin. This is in view of the fact that plant origin foods, which are good sources of protein, are generally rich sources of dietary fiber, have low amounts of saturated fat, and are devoid of cholesterol. Egg white and lean meats, meat without fat, should be the preferred options in case of animal foods. Of late, tremendous amount of research is being carried out to find out the potential of micronutrients and trace elements in the treatment, management, and prevention of dyslipidemia. Let us brief ourselves on these aspects too. Vitamins, antioxidants, and flavonoids, natural vitamin E, vitamin C, and are nutrients. Vitamins that scavenge cell-damaging free radicals and act as antioxidants, as you may recall studying earlier in Unit 7. It is important to know this in view of the fact that damage through free radicals is quite pronounced among patients with syndrome X, a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Vitamin A is present in good amounts in green and yellow fruits and vegetables, and lycopene in tomatoes and anthocyanin in grapes and berries. Vitamin E-rich foods include corn, 0.09 mg, almonds, 25.86 mg, sunflower seeds, 23.1 mg, spinach, 1.29 mg, and soya bean, 1.29 mg. Hence, vitamins E, C, and A containing foods, bright yellow fruits and vegetables like papaya, orange, mango, strawberry, tomato, carrots, and green leafy vegetables like methi and spinach, cabbage, red wines, tea, and soya bean are excellent foods because of their antioxidant properties. Minerals. The three most important minerals are chromium, zinc, and magnesium. These minerals play a critical role in maintaining proper insulin function. Deficiency of these minerals increase the risk of syndrome X, a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Excess of sodium intake and lack of potassium have been seen to play an important role in hypertension. Low intakes of calcium can also be a risk for cardiac disorder. Sodium added to the food or sodium-rich foods need to be restricted in cardiovascular diseases. Antioxidants and flavonoids. You must have already read about different antioxidants present in our foods. The body makes use of a great variety of antioxidants and free radical scavengers for different purposes and to protect tissues with different needs. Vitamins A, C, and E have important antioxidant functions, as you have already studied above. The B vitamins, although not technically antioxidants, often acts as a cofactor with antioxidants. Flavonoids are naturally occurring in fruits, vegetables, tea, and wine. Let us next summarize about some important guidelines that can help in planning diets for hyperlipidemic patients. Dietary guidelines for hyperlipidemic patients. A summary. Calories to maintain ideal body weight. Carbohydrates should constitute 55 to 65% of calories with emphasis on polysaccharides, complex carbohydrates, sugar less than 10% of total calories, dietary fiber 40 g day, proteins 15 to 20% of modified energy, fat 15 to 20% of total energy, dietary cholesterol 200 to 300 mg day. It is important to note here that the dietary modifications need to be individualized in each patient, and these should be tailored to the abnormalities of the specific component. Initially, lipid disorders are treated by diet modification and physical exercise. After 3-6 months, if there is no improvement, then drugs are given in addition to the diet and exercise. A diet history prior to dietary changes must be assessed. The approximate intake of cholesterol, total fat, unsaturated fat, and alcohol, simple and complex. Carbohydrates should be assessed and accordingly the subject tackled. Some dietary tips that may be of help for hyperlipidemic patients include: cholesterol and fat intake could be decreased by avoiding whole milk, cheese, curds made from whole milk. Skimmed milk or toned milk may be used. Organ meats, brain, liver, kidneys, limiting egg yolks, cold meats, canned and sausages, ham, frankfurters, peanut butter should be avoided. Instead, fish and poultry, baked and steamed, can be taken. Baked foods made with refined flour, made like cookies, patties, pastries, cakes, samosas, etc., must be avoided. Whole wheat flour snacks may be encouraged. All fats, especially butter, margarine, cream, coconut oil, hydrogenated fats must be avoided. Instead, oils rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids, safflower, soya bean, sunflower, and monounsaturated fatty acids, olive oil, peanut oil, rapeseed oil, may be used. Fresh fruits, canned or dried fruits, limited amounts, could be consumed, and fruits with cream, butter, ice creams, or dips avoided. Vegetables could be consumed except root vegetables in large quantities. Triglycerides could be decreased by limiting foods high in fats, decreasing sugar and sugar-containing foods, carbonated beverages, fruit drinks, sweet snacks and desserts, honey, jam, jelly, chocolate and candy. Decreasing alcohol intake, reducing portion size, striving for reducing weight, and increased physical exercise. Having understood the etiology, symptoms, and dietary management of dyslipidemia, we will now proceed to learn about an important clinical manifestation of elevated lipids that remains asymptomatic for a long time: atherosclerosis. Remember, we acquainted ourselves about this disease in subsection 1.1.2.3. 1.1.3.2 Atherosclerosis, a coronary artery disease. Atherosclerosis is an arterial lesion characterized by patchy thickening of the intima, innermost coat of artery, comprising of fat and layers of collagen-like fibers. This is a slow or progressive disease, degenerative in nature, affecting small and large arteries and weaken them, leading to proliferation. This leads to problems in smooth flow of blood. These deposits are referred to as plaque, as illustrated in figure 11.2. The plaque reduces the size of the lumen of the artery and consequently, the amount of blood flow. The reduced blood flow causes an inadequate nutrient and oxygen supply and water removal from the tissues, leading to a condition referred to as ischemia. This condition causes pain in the chest, which is referred to as angina pectoris, and it radiates down the left arm. when the lumen narrows so much so that a blood clot occurs in a coronary artery and blood flow is cut off, a heart attack can result. The dead tissue that results is called an infarct. The heart muscle that receives the blood is the myocardium. Thus, such an attack is referred to as an acute myocardial infarction, MI. Atherosclerosis is thus categorized as a continuum of as fatty streaks, intermediate lesions, fibrous plaques, and complicated lesions. There are 5 phases to atherosclerosis. Phase 1, asymptomatic phase, consists of fatty streaks which are non-obstructive, lipid-filled cells. Phase 2 consists of plaque with high lipid content and prone to rupture usually. The type of lipid is LDLC. Phase 3, acute complicated phase with rupture and non-occlusive thrombus. Phase 4, acute complicated lesions with occlusive thrombus which are associated with angina, myocardial infarction, and even sudden death. Phase 5, fibrotic or occlusive lesion. Large thrombi can cause serious acute defects. Figure 11.2, progression of plaque in coronary artery. Look at the screen. Having understood the development and progression of atherosclerosis, next let us get to know what are the causes for this degenerative disease. Etiology. Various factors are responsible for atherosclerosis. These include 1. Hyperlipidemia, excess circulating fats in blood, especially the low-density lipoprotein, LDL, and low levels of high-density lipoprotein, HDL, can predispose to atherosclerosis. 2. Hypertension, HD, can accelerate atherosclerosis and cause complications. 3. Diabetes mellitus, an important risk factor commonly associated with hypertension due to abnormalities of coagulation, platelet adhesion and aggregation, increased oxidative stress, and abnormalities in vessel vasomotion, can be a high risk for atherosclerosis. 4. Obesity, excessive triglycerides, hyperglycemia, and LDLC levels are commonly present in obese, and lower HDL levels are a great independent risk factors for atherosclerosis. 5. Lifestyle, low physical activity, cigarette smoking could affect the rate of atherosclerosis. Increased CAD risk, on the other hand, regular exercise is seen to be protective. 6. Factors causing endothelial damage, elevated blood homocysteine A, genetically determined, and viral infections of lungs could damage the endothelial and cause injury and hence lead to atherosclerosis. What then are the symptoms and complications linked with atherosclerosis? Let us find out. Symptoms: excessive weight, hypertension, high levels of cholesterol and triglycerides. Complications: myocardial infarction, systolic and diastolic dysfunction, inflammatory problems, pericarditis, stroke, gangrene, death and decay of body tissue, and aneurysm, blood filled dilation of a blood vessel. Now that we know the pathophysiology of atherosclerosis, let us learn about the nutritional management goals of this disorder. Nutritional management goals. The nutritional management goals include reduction of weight if overweight or obese, reduction in the intake of total fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol, medication if required for treating lipid disorders and controlling BP. Lifestyle changes, increase in physical exercise, moderation in alcohol intake, no smoking, restricting coffee, consuming a balanced, adequate diet rich in calcium, chromium, iron, and zinc. Medical management is through various lipid-lowering drugs. dietary management, and the nutrient requirements during atherosclerosis remain the same as for the management of dyslipidemia. Hence, we shall not go into the details here. In our subsequent discussions, we will learn about a major clinical manifestation of progressive atherosclerosis, i.e., myocardial infarction. We will also update ourselves regarding some disorders commonly observed among patients suffering from myocardial infarction. These include hypertension and angina pectoris. As mentioned earlier, in this section we shall discuss about an important acute, often life-threatening clinical manifestation of progressive atherosclerosis with myocardial infarction. We shall also learn about a chronic degenerative heart disease which is frequently observed among poorly managed survivors of myocardial infarction, i.e., congestive cardiac failure. However, the management of these conditions is often challenging due to the presence of high blood pressure and chest discomfort, angina pectoris. Hence, let us first proceed with hypertension. 1.3.3 Hypertension, HT. As you have seen in the above sections, hypertension is one of the major risk factors for cardiovascular disease. It is the most common public health problem and often referred to as a silent killer. If untreated, it can lead to a major health setback and cause many complications. In this section, we will know more about this disease condition. We all have experienced our heartbeat on several occasions. We can hear it more sharply with a stethoscope. The sound you hear is looped up. The first sound loop, you may recall reading in the Applied Physiology course, MFN 001, in Unit 4 is the systolic sound, which occurs when the heart contracts and pushes out the blood into the various parts of the body. This denotes the higher range of pressure called systolic blood pressure, SBP, which is measured as millimeters of mercury, mmHg. The sound dup is the relaxation period of the heart when the blood enters the heart chambers. This is the diastolic blood pressure, DBP, and denotes the lower blood pressure. To understand hypertension, we must have an idea about normal and high blood pressure range. According to American College of Cardiology, ACC, American Heart Association, AHA, 2017, we have doubled our risk of cardiovascular complications compared to these with normal levels of blood pressure. Therefore, new guidelines ACC AHA 2017 have lowered the definition of high blood pressure so that early interventions can be taken. Table 11.5 Classification of blood pressures and stages of hypertension in adults. 120/80 normal. 120/129 80 elevated. 130/139/80-89 stage I. 140 90 stage 2. 180 120 hypertensive crisis. These guidelines eliminates the category of prehypertension as categorized earlier. A new category included is elevated hypertension, 120/129 80 mm per Hg. High blood pressure is one of the leading causes of kidney failure, also commonly called end-stage renal disease, ESRD, about which you will learn later in this course. In Unit 16, major complications of hypertension includes kidney disease, kidney failure, end-stage renal disease, heart disease, hardened arteries, cardiovascular disease, angina, heart attack, left ventricular hypertrophy, heart failure, left side heart failure, stroke, cerebrovascular disease, eye complications. cerebral hemorrhage, retinal damage, impaired vision, death. Unlike many other diseases, hypertension develops insidiously, without symptoms. In 90% of hypertension cases, the cause is unknown. This condition is called essential or primary hypertension. Rest of the cases with hypertension do have an identifiable cause and are said to have secondary hypertension. This means that hypertension is caused by some other problems such as diabetes, thyroid and adrenal gland problems, and kidney disease. Figure 11.3 presents the classification and manifestations of hypertension. Classification on hypertension. Primary hypertension. High blood pressure in the absence of any underlying disease. Benign hypertension. Malignant hypertension. Secondary hypertension. Elevated blood pressure due to some underlying disease. Cardiovascular hypertension. Endocrine hypertension. Renal hypertension. Neurogenic hypertension. Pregnancy-induced hypertension. Manifestations of hypertension. Renal failure. Left ventricular failure. Myocardial infarction. Cerebral hemorrhage. Hypertension can be damaging due to two effects. 1. Increased workload on the heart, and 2. Effect of hypertension on arteries. The increased workload on the heart causes hypertrophy, increase in size of tissue of the cardiac muscle. The left ventricle continues to beat against the high blood pressure, resulting in the enlargement of heart. Enlargement is due to increase in muscle formation. As hypertension becomes severe, the heart becomes weaker. High blood pressure causes coronary sclerosis, hardening. In early stages, fatty lesions in the inner surface of the artery occur, and this damages the inner surface of the artery, intima. Once the damage occurs, the endothelial cells swell and the smooth muscle below gets affected, causing atherosclerosis, deposits of cholesterol, calcium on fibrous matter, leading to hard arteries, which lose their distensibility and could rupture. The deposits, plaque, may protrude in the lumen, causing problems with blood flow and roughness of the surface. This could cause clots, thrombus, and damage to the organs. Let us then learn about the causative factors of hypertension. Etiology. Earlier in the unit, we learnt about the various risk factors of cardiovascular disease. We will now briefly mention the causes related to hypertension. 1. Genetic factors. Currently, it is believed that there is polygenic inheritance, and when environmental factors are not healthy, hypertension is precipitated. 2. Body weight and height. Hypertension increases with increase in the weight and height. Hence, those who are obese have higher blood pressure values. Increase in BMI increases hypertension. 3. Age increases steeply with age. Now scientists have found shifts in BP. It is found in adolescents and the young as well. 4. Gender rise is greater in men than women, but after menopause, the difference decreases. 5. Factors that may increase reabsorption by sodium can cause hypertension. 6. Changes in renin-angiotensin, aldosterone system and excretion of adrenocorticoids and prolactin may affect blood pressure. 7. Hyperinsulinemia of obese may influence blood pressure susceptibility through renal sodium reabsorption and transport. 8. Dietary factors, excess calories, fats, especially saturated fat and cholesterol in large quantities can increase blood pressure. Refined carbohydrates, sugars, could have an effect, but studies in humans are inconclusive. High fiber intakes are beneficial. Soluble fiber, Possible role of chloride, low potassium, K, and high sodium diets is a suspect. Less calcium and magnesium in diet could cause hypertension. 9. Modern lifestyle, sedentary life devoid of exercise, stress, smoking, tobacco intake, alcohol are pointing towards increases in blood pressure. We will now proceed over to the management of hypertension. Treatment and management of hypertension. The first choice of treatment and management of primary hypertension is through behavior modifications pertaining to food choices and lifestyle pattern. Patients who cannot maintain near normal levels despite dietary and lifestyle disorders are prescribed medications. Dietary management is important even for such patients in order to avoid drug dependency, side effects, and dosage. We shall now learn in detail about the dietary management of hypertension. However, let us first identify the objectives of nutritional management. Objectives of nutritional management. The objective of nutritional management of hypertension includes to achieve gradual weight loss in overweight and obese individuals and maintain weight slightly below the normal levels, to reduce sodium intake and maintain fluid and electrolyte balance, to maintain adequate nutrition, to lead a healthy lifestyle, no smoking, alcohol, to slow down the onset of complications. In order to meet the above objectives, we need to understand the nutrient requirements during hypertension. Let us start with the calorie requirements. Energy, calorie requirement should be based on the concept of maintaining an ideal body weight. Excess calories through fats and carbohydrates have to be reduced so that the weight is maintained. Proteins, a normal protein intake is recommended. Protein should contribute 15 to 20% of the total energy needs. Excess non-vegetarian foods, especially red meat and egg yolks, could be avoided as it has greater proportion of saturated fatty acids. Fats, the fats incorporated in the diet should be rich in unsaturated fatty acids and should not provide more than 20% of the total energy. Refer dietary management of dyslipidemia for details. Carbohydrates, about 60 to 65% energy should be provided from carbohydrates, which are polysaccharides, complex carbohydrates, rather than simple sugars, monosaccharides, and disaccharides. Let us now learn about the most important aspect of dietary management, i.e., the intake of minerals and electrolytes, which are closely associated with the maintenance of blood volume. Hypovolemia, as we know, would cause greater pressure on the arteries. Minerals and electrolytes. Minerals and electrolytes of clinical significance include calcium, sodium, and potassium. Let us read about them one by one. Calcium, Ca. Adequate calcium intake is an essential part of the treatment, and this could be ensured through intakes of milk and milk products and green vegetable, as well as adequate cereals and pulse intakes. Sodium, studies have shown that sodium restriction along with weight reduction is effective in controlling mild to moderate hypertension along with diuretics. Recommended. Sodium is restricted to 1 to 2 g day, which equates to 2.5-5 g of salt for a day. The conversion factor for this is grams of sodium x 2.5 is equal to grams of salt. For your reference, 1 teaspoon of salt contains about 2,300 milligrams of sodium. However, it is wise to keep salt at lower level, 2.5 g, as the rest of the sodium can be accounted in a day's diet. Depending on the severity of hypertension, different levels of sodium intake can be recommended. These include mild sodium restriction to 2,3 g sodium, 2000 to 3000 milligrams. Salt may be used lightly in cooking, but no salt at the table is allowed. There is no restriction on naturally occurring fresh foods, but processed foods should be avoided. Moderate sodium restriction 1 g sodium, 1000 milligrams. In addition to the above restrictions, some control in naturally occurring fresh foods and no salt in cooking is added. Canned vegetables and baked products are avoided. Meat and milk products are used in moderate amounts. Strict sodium restriction 0.5 g sodium, 500 milligrams. Apart from the restrictions stated above, meat, milk, and eggs are allowed in small portions. Severe sodium restriction 0.25 g sodium, 250 milligrams. This level is too restrictive and nutritionally inadequate and unrealistic to be used practically. In this, restricted quantities of meat and eggs are used only occasionally. Table 11.6 presents details on low sodium foods. Potassium. Increasing the potassium content in the diet lowers the blood pressure and improves hypertension. This could be done by increasing fruits and vegetables in the diet, which are rich in both potassium and fiber content. Fluids. Fluid restriction is necessary only if edema is present. Dehydration may be observed in some patients on diuretics. Thus, normal amount of fluids, especially in the form of plain drinking water, can be taken. Thus, remember the following points while chalking out a patient care plan for hypertensives. Lifestyle changes, avoiding smoking, use of tobacco, and excess alcohol intake. Physical activity like walking 4 times a week for 40 minutes is beneficial. Medications, diuretics, calcium channel blockers, and others should be consumed regularly. Nutritious balanced diet. The diet of a hypertensive should be nutritious. It should be low in calories, if required, and fat with a normal protein content. It should be low in sodium but rich in potassium, calcium, magnesium, and fiber. Currently, the DASH diets are recommended. These are rich in fruits and vegetables, non-fat dairy products, and low in total as well as saturated fats. The lifestyle modifications to manage hypertension are highlighted in Table 11.7. Table 11.7. Lifestyle modifications to manage hypertension. Modification recommendation. Weight reduction. Maintain normal body weight, BMI, 18.52. 24.9. Adopt dietary approach to stop consume diet rich in fruits, vegetables. Hypertension, DASH, and low-fat dairy products with a reduced content of saturated and total fat. Dietary sodium reduction. Reduce sodium intake to no more than 6 g. Sodium chloride. Physical activity. Engage in regular aerobic physical activity, such as brisk walk, at least 30 minutes per day, most days. Alcohol consumption limit to no more than 2 drinks per day. With this, we end our discussion on hypertension. Next, we will proceed towards understanding the details of managing angina pectoris. 1.3.4 Angina pectoris. Chest discomfort is often reported by most patients, especially those which are chronic cases of dyslipidemia and or hypertension. Like diarrhea and fever, angina pectoris is a symptom and can appear in any cardiovascular disease condition. It is a tight, choking feeling in the chest brought about by effort or less often by excitement. It is worse in cold weather or after heavy meals and is due to lack of blood to heart muscles. The angina could be stable or unstable. The stable angina shows no changes in the patterns of frequency or severity. The unstable angina becomes increasingly severe and the pain develops with less and less effort. It is sometimes called the brittle angina. Most common causes associated with angina pectoris are enumerated herewith. The usual cause of angina is the narrowing of the major coronary artery due to atherosclerosis. Systemic hypertension increases myocardial demand, and if the supply of blood to the heart muscles is less, it can cause angina. Heart disease. In late stages of aortic stenosis, narrowing of aorta, it can precipitate an anginal attack. Anemia. The heart gets less oxygen due to lack of hemoglobin in anemia. Thyroid disease. Thyroid disease is associated with angina. Angina pectoris presents itself in the form of specific symptoms which tend to reoccur after a particular level of activity or exertion. The most typical symptoms and complications are mentioned next. Symptoms. The pain of angina is usually over the center of the chest, below the sternum, but can be felt from epigastrum to the jaw and arms. It is brought about by exertion sometimes by stress and is relieved by rest. The duration of angina is short and can be relieved in 3 minutes on rest. Complications. It is a symptom giving a warning of impending myocardial infarction, sudden cardiac death, or even ischemic necrosis of the brain leading to cerebral stroke. Now that we have learnt about the causes, symptoms of angina, let us get to know how to manage this condition. Treatment and dietary management. Proper and careful treatment of the underlying cause, usually dyslipidemia, advanced atherosclerosis or severe chronic hypertension, is imperative to prevent the occurrence of any acute ischemic event, namely myocardial infarction, stroke. Dietary management is the key component in preventing the progression of underlying disease condition. The most vital objectives of dietary and lifestyle management include to maintain ideal weight for age, to lower blood pressure through drugs and diet control, to avoid exertion and unnecessary stress, to follow a prudent diet. The nutrient requirement here are the same as discussed earlier. However, to sum up, it can be said that we need to restrict calories from total fats, particularly saturated fats, and from simple carbohydrates, avoid glandular meats, brain, liver, kidneys, etc. Use less salt in cooking and avoid salt sprinklers. Use a prudent diet as explained under the hypertension section. Let us move on to the next disorder, which is often referred to as the last stage in development of CAD, i.e., myocardial infarction. It is an irreversible form of CAD and often results in decompensated changes in the structure and function of the heart. We should read and understand this critical disease carefully as it is often life-threatening, and most of the patients are hospitalized in the intensive cardiac care unit. 1.3.5 Myocardial infarction, MI. It is an initial acute phase of cardiovascular disease caused by the blockage of a coronary artery supplying blood to the heart. Figure 11.3 shows the progression of this disease. Myocardial infarction generally occurs when fibrous plaques coalesce together with blood clots to result in complete blockage or stenosis in artery supplying oxygen and nutrients through blood to the heart. The heart tissue denied blood because of this blockage ultimately dies as indicated in blue color in figure 11.4. Now what causes it? Let us see. Figure 11.4. Infarction in the heart tissue. Persistently elevated blood lipids, particularly LDLC, serum triglycerides, chronic hypertension, and alterations in the balance between prostacyclins, a prostaglandin, and thromboxanes are most directly associated in the development of occlusion of an artery. Myocardial infarction is a critical disease with high frequencies of morbidity and mortality. Both medical and dietary management play a crucial role in managing the condition, as well as in preventing reoccurrence death. Proper nutritional care is also imperative if the patient needs to be operated to improve his quality of life. Let us understand some important aspects of dietary care in detail. Dietary management. Patients who suffer from an attack of myocardial infarction are hospitalized and are usually kept under strict medical supervision. During the initial 24 to 48 hours, most patients are on intravenous support and, if needed, on an artificial ventilator to meet their oxygen requirements. Initially, oral food intake is restricted and not recommended, as the ailing heart cannot support the oxygen and absorption of food. Oral food intake is resumed based on several cardiac function tests which help in assessing the residual functional capacity of the heart after injury. A low-fat soft diet is generally recommended, and during the initial stages foods may be introduced in very small quantities every hour or after every 2 hours. Observation of the patient during consumption of food and at least till a half to 1 hour after eating is essential to rule out the elicitation of angina pectoris or another attack of myocardial infarction. Let us now understand the nutrient requirements and overall dietary management of MI patients. We will first identify the objectives of the nutrition care process. You may want to read the pathophysiology discussed in section 11.3. Objectives. The objectives of dietary management of myocardial infarction patients are as follows: to provide rest to the injured heart, to maintain an optimum nutritional status, to achieve and maintain a desirable body weight, to prevent the development of another attack of MI. Let us then learn as to how can we fulfill the above-mentioned objectives through suitable modifications in the nutrient intake. We will start with the calorie requirements of the patient. Energy. As mentioned above, patients who have recently suffered from an attack of myocardial infarction are hospitalized in the intensive cardiac care unit wherein their movement is strictly restricted and they generally are advised not to socialize a lot. Thus, the energy expenditure on physical activity is very low or negligible. The diet should therefore provide enough calories to meet the basal requirements, hence a low-calorie diet is recommended. Other benefits of providing a low-calorie diet include reduction in the adipose tissue mass, particularly among obese patients, and hence reduced oxygen requirements of the body tissues, reduction in the requirement of oxygen associated with ingestion, digestion, and assimilation of food. The energy intake may initially begin with 800 kcal, which can be slowly progressed to a 1200 kcal diet till the patient is discharged. Thereafter, the patient's energy intake should be governed on the maintenance of body weight, which is preferably 1 to 2 kilograms below IBW. We will now brief ourselves on the contribution of macronutrients towards the total energy intake. Protein, carbohydrates, and fat. The protein intake generally remains the same as per the RDIE. 1.0 gram protein per kg body weight per day. Adequate amount of Proteins are necessary to promote regeneration of the necrotic tissues in the myocardium. As we had mentioned earlier, emphasis should be laid on plant proteins and low-fat animal products, skimmed milk, low-fat paneer, chicken, fish and other marine foods. Majority of MI patients are also hyperlipidemic and have elevated serum triglyceride levels. In such cases, the calorie contribution from fat should not be above 20% and the dietary cholesterol intake should remain below 200 milligrams per day. Details on the type of fat and food sources have been mentioned in section 11.3 earlier in the dietary management of hyperlipidemia. You may recapitulate from details mentioned in Table 11.7 on how to reduce fat and cholesterol intake. Table 11.8 How to reduce fat and cholesterol intake. Milk, avoid whole milk, cheese, ice cream restrict 3% fat milk, processed curds use skimmed milk. Meat avoid organ meats, sausages, cold cuts restricts fish canned in oil, shrimps, mutton with fat. Use fish and marine food. Carbohydrates should provide 60% of the total energy. However, emphasis should be laid on the inclusion of easy-to-digest simple carbohydrates, which are low in fiber. Low-fiber cereals, roots and tubers should be served in a soft, well-cooked blended form, purees etc. Vitamins and minerals. The requirement of vitamins and minerals is largely governed by the existing nutritional status and the clinical parameters of the patient. Mild to moderate sodium restriction is generally recommended if the patient is hypertensive or is at risk of developing edema due to congestive cardiac failure. Inclusion of low fiber, low sodium fruits and vegetables can help in providing good amounts of iron and B group vitamins, particularly folic acid and vitamin B12. So far, we have discussed the nutrient requirements during myocardial infarction. Mentioned below are a few useful tips that would be helpful in chalking out the nutrition care process of the patient. Nutrition support and other considerations. You must have understood by now that the nutrient requirements of a MI patient vary from time of getting hospitalized in an emergency to the time of getting discharged. Patients when admitted to the intensive cardiac unit are critically ill and could be on life support system. They are initially kept on intravenous fluids to maintain a desirable blood volume and also to supply some amount of calories. As the condition improves, the patients may either be put on enteral tube feeding, intubated with ventilator to supply oxygen, or introduced small sips of full fluids after every 1 to 2 hours. The diet is gradually progressed to a semi-soft and then a soft one. The patients are closely observed when on a soft to normal diet a few days before discharge. Thus, great care must be taken regarding the consistency and quantity of food being served to the patient. The patient should be advised to eat slowly and adhere to a small, frequent meal pattern even after discharge. Rest after meals should be advocated and the patient should avoid all forms of activity after meals. If the patient is overweight, obese and needs to be operated, a low-calorie diet to aid in weight reduction is a must. As a dietitian, you must be vigilant if the patient is also a diabetic, as his insulin requirements may fluctuate drastically during the post-MI period. Proper dietary counseling must be provided, particularly if congestive cardiac failure is present. In our next section, we shall learn about the causes, symptoms, treatment and management of congestive cardiac failure, a decompensated heart disease that frequently develops among patients of MI after several years of rehabilitation. In this section, we read about the management of hypertension, angina pectoris, and myocardial infarction. It must be clear to you that some aspects of dietary management may differ in the disease condition, and the diet must thus be individualized. Let us now attempt the Check Your Progress exercise 3 before we proceed further. So far, we have learnt about hyperlipidemia, atherosclerosis, angina pectoris, hypertension, and myocardial infarction. Most of these diseases, except myocardial infarction, are chronic in nature and usually reversible. Myocardial infarction is of course an acute form of CHD and causes irreversible damage. In this section, we will proceed to learn about yet another decompensated heart disease, viz., congestive cardiac failure. 1.3.6 Congestive cardiac failure, CCF. It is an end-stage heart disease and a significant contributor to morbidity and mortality, particularly in the elderly population. Congestive cardiac failure is a form of chronic decompensated disease as the condition may develop over a period of time. It results from an injury to the heart muscle due to atherosclerosis, hypertension, or rheumatic fever resulting in progressive weakening of the heart muscle. This leads to inadequate blood circulation and hence insufficient supply of nutrients and oxygen to the tissues. This leads to malnutrition and underweight. If edema is present, it masks the state of malnutrition. Mostly hemodynamic derangements are present. Congestive cardiac failure causes left ventricular systolic dysfunction over a period of time. The heart muscle myocardium gets weakened progressively and is not able to maintain normal cardiac blood output or blood circulation. Firstly, it can cause pulmonary edema, causing breathing problems of pumping out blood fast enough, resulting in blood accumulation on the right side of the heart, affecting normal circulation. This affects the normal flow of fluid between tissue space and blood vessel, which thus starts accumulating in the tissue, causing edema. The two hormones in the body that control water balance also fail: antidiuretic hormone and the aldosterone. The aldosterone conserves sodium and water and worsens the edema. Reduced blood circulation affects the metabolism of tissues, resulting in increased cells breakdown, and potassium is released. Increased potassium in the cell increases the osmotic pressure, and sodium tries to replace potassium, causing more water retention. Congestive heart failure develops over a period of time when the necrotic tissues are not replaced by functional connective cells, thereby affecting the contraction and relaxation capacity of the heart. Weakness of the heart muscles can be due to varied reasons, some of which are discussed below. Etiology. The causes of this disorder can be numerous. The risk factors which are known are chronic hypertension, left ventricular hypertrophy, coronary heart disease, recurrent episodes of IHD, particularly myocardial infarction, diabetes, advancing age, viral damage, alcohol abuse, injury. The characteristic signs and symptoms which develop due to the inadequate pumping capacity of the failing heart are being discussed next. Symptoms. Congestive cardiac failure is a progressive form of cardiomyopathy. The most classical symptom is fluid imbalance due to inadequate cardiac output, which results in cardiac pulmonary edema, which may later involve other organs in the abdomen. Since the hemodynamic changes may or may not develop at the same time, the Clinical symptoms can vary a great deal from patient to patient. The most common symptoms seen are fatigue, faintness and weakness, swelling of feet and ankles, shortness of breath even after lying down, loss of appetite, indigestion, nausea, and vomiting, congestion, inadequate cardiac output, altered fluid balance, edema, cardiac cachexia, severe malnutrition, decreased urine production. One manifestation of congestive cardiac failure is decreased exercise tolerance. Depending on the level of compensation, this leads to symptoms of shortness of breath upon exertion, orthopnea, inability to breathe easily, and edema. However, these symptoms occur primarily in the late stages of cardiomyopathy. Notably, atrial fibrillation and ventricular dysrhythmias may be early signs of myocardial disease. Apart from these, other noticeable symptoms are weight gain due to edema, swelling of feet and ankles, swelling of the abdomen, pronounced neck veins, difficulty in sleeping, sensation of feeling the heart beat, palpitations, irregular or rapid pulse rate, decreased alertness or concentration, cough, decreased urine production. The above-mentioned complications ultimately result in total failure of the heart, circulatory collapse, and circulatory problems causing organ damage, heart, lungs, kidney. Impaired cardiac function could also lead to cardiomegaly, enlargement of heart, tachycardia, rapid pulse rate, heart rhythm problems, growth retardation in children. Poor peripheral perfusion results in cold extremities, weak pulse, low blood pressure. If pulmonary edema is present, it can cause wheezing and problems in breathing. Next, let us learn about the treatment of this condition. Treatment: a judicious and careful coordination between oxygen support, drug therapy, and nutrient intake can help in alleviating majority of the symptoms associated with congestive cardiac failure, thereby reducing the frequency of morbidities and mortalities associated with this disease. ACE inhibitors, diuretics, beta blockers, and digitalis drugs are generally used in conjunction with dietary management and oxygen support. Severe category: hospitalized patients. Surgical management involves heart transplantation, cardiomyoplasty, mechanical support, and dialysis. Most of these are conducted as life-saving strategies. Whatever may be the choice of treatment, it generally revolves around the following objectives: to provide relief from the symptoms, to improve the quality of life, prolong life by reducing, stopping, or reversing left ventricular dysfunction, to maintain adequate nutritional status. In our subsequent discussion, we shall elaborate upon the nutrient requirements of the patients. We will also highlight some important aspects of dietary management and nutrition support that can help in the treatment, delaying the progression of congestive cardiac failure. Dietary management. Nutritional care is a little difficult in congestive cardiac failure. This is because edema complicates the nutritional assessment of the subject. Because of cardiac cachexia, the subject can lose about 10 to 15% of the usual weight, and there is depletion of lean body mass. Poor reserves of essential vitamins, calcium, and iron have also been observed. Thus, in view of the symptoms and treatment objectives, let us first identify the goals of dietary management. Dietary management. The objectives of dietary management include: to minimize stress workload on the heart, to correct and maintain fluid and electrolyte imbalance, to maintain a desirable body weight, and to maintain an optimum nutritional status. Keeping the above objectives in mind, let us proceed over to the nutrient requirements of the patient. We shall begin with the energy needs and then proceed to the micronutrient intake, which would be most feasible for the patient. Let us move on to the calorie requirement. Energy, composition of the calorie requirements on the basis of body weight is usually not feasible due to the presence of edema. Thus, energy requirements are generally based on the residual cardiac function and the usual body weight of the patient. The need for oxygen support is also an important factor for determining the energy intake needs to be sufficient to meet nutritional needs and prevent deterioration in nutritional status, and at the same time care should be taken to avoid a positive energy balance unless so desired. This is so because excessive body mass increases the cardiac workload and weight gain from increased fat stores should be avoided. Gain in adiposity should be distinguished from short-term fluctuations in body weight caused by changes in fluid balance. Patients on artificial oxygen support systems and or those who are obese are recommended 1200 kcal diet. Ambulatory and or normal weight patients are usually able to tolerate around 25 kcal kg IBW or usual body weight per day. Not much efforts are made to increase weight among severely undernourished patients, as increased food intake would impose enhanced burden on the heart. Let us now proceed to the contribution of various other nutrients to meet the above discussed objectives. We will begin with protein. Protein. The protein requirements remain the same as healthy adult men and women. About 1 g of protein per kg usual or ideal body weight should be incorporated in the diet orally or by special methods of feeding. Since congestive cardiac failure is a form of cardiomyopathy and there is weakness of cardiac muscles, it is essential to supply good amounts of dietary proteins, particularly high biological value proteins, to facilitate tissue synthesis. Emphasis needs to be laid on plant proteins, which are at the same time low in sodium, rather than animal proteins. Carbohydrate. While the quantity of carbohydrate remains almost the same as per the RDIE, 60% of the total energy, the quality of carbohydrate needs to be modified. Since the requirement of oxygen for the digestion and metabolism of complex carbohydrates is much higher as compared to that of simple carbohydrates, it is recommended that the diet should be low in fiber and should provide good amount of simple carbohydrates, semolina, refined rice, dehusked pulses, papaya, mango, brinjal, pumpkin, gourd, etc. Whole cereals and pulses, legumes, lotus stem, cabbage. Soy flour should be avoided. Fat. The quantity and quality of fat would be governed by the severity of hyperlipidemia and adiposity. Emphasis, as always, should be laid on oils rich in MUFAs and PUFAs. Fats rich in SFAs should be avoided. You may refer to subsection 1.3.1 for details. In any case, fats should not provide more than 20% of the total energy, and the diet should be low in cholesterol, 200 mg per day, depending upon the lipid profile of the patient. Minerals. Since sodium and potassium are the major electrolytes associated with edema, it is important that sodium intake should be 135 to 145 mg/L and potassium intake should be 3.5 to 5.0 mg/L. Mild to moderate sodium restriction, 2.0 to 3.0 GNA per day, is often beneficial for most patients. Restriction of table salt and cooking. Salt is recommended for all patients. High sodium fruits and vegetables such as fenugreek leaves, lettuce, spinach, beetroot, tomato, grapes, lychee, musk melon, as well as processed foods and preserves should be avoided. The extent of sodium restriction should be recommended by the dietitian depending upon the severity of retention of sodium and water. Vitamins. The requirements of all vitamins remains the same as per the RDI. If the patient is also suffering from hyperlipidemia atherosclerosis, liberal intake of vitamin A, vitamin C and folic acid may be helpful. Fluids. Fluid intake should be monitored in accordance with urine output and severity of edema. Fluid restriction is more important if the patient is not receiving diuretics. Patients on diuretics may consume normal amounts of fluids, i.e., around 1.5 liters per day. The fluid allowance for patients not being prescribed diuretics can be estimated by any of the two methods given herewith. Using the formula, fluid allowance is equal to urine output plus 500 milliliters plus losses of fluids due to diarrhea, vomiting, if any. To weighing the patient every day to find out gain in weight due to fluid retention and hence restricting the requisite amount if required. Some other considerations are highlighted next. Other considerations. Subjects with congestive cardiac failure often tolerate small frequent meals better than larger infrequent meals, as these are tiring to consume, can contribute to abdominal distension and markedly increase oxygen consumption. Alternative seasonings and flavoring agents such as mild herbs and condiments may be used sparingly if sodium restriction is moderate to severe in order to ensure adequate food intake. The menu should be planned by keeping in mind the fluid allowance for the day. The patient should be advised to chew the food slowly. Sweating and chest discomfort are indicators of oxygen deficiency. Food ingestion should be stopped. In such situations, meals should be soft and well cooked. Raw food should be completely avoided. A liquid diet may be gradually progressed to a semi-soft, soft and a normal diet. If the patient is on ventilator, oral intake may not be feasible. In such situations, enteral parenteral tube feeding should be started. The dietary management details discussed in the text above are usually recommended for congestive heart failure patients not suffering from liver or renal failure. Dialysis is the treatment of choice in case of renal failure. In such situations, restrictions on sodium and fluid may be less rigid. Next, we shall proceed to yet another form of coronary heart disease, i.e., rheumatic heart disease, which generally affects children. 1.3.7 Rheumatic heart disease, RHD. Rheumatic heart disease, RHD, is a very common cause of cardiovascular disorder in children and adolescents in India. This disease involves damage to the entire heart and its membranes. It is a complication of rheumatic fever resulting from an untreated Streptococcus throat injection and usually occurs after attacks of rheumatic fever. Rheumatic fever can damage the heart valves. If the heart valves are damaged, they will fail to open and close properly. When this damage is permanent, the condition is called rheumatic heart disease. What are the symptoms and complications linked with rheumatic heart disease? Let us find out. Symptoms. Symptoms generally appear after 1 to 6 weeks of the fever, and sometimes the infection may have been too mild to have been recognized. The symptoms are fever, fatigue, shortness of breath, fainting, palpitation, and chest pain. Swollen, tender, red, painful. Nodules or small protuberances may appear. There could be red, raised, lattice like. Rash and uncontrolled movements of arms, legs, and facial muscles. Complications: inflammation of lining of heart, pericarditis, anemia, heart enlargement, valve. Deformities, mitral and tricuspid valves, embolism, arrhythmia, abdominal pain, fever, arthritis, etc. Having learnt about the symptoms, complications, let us also review the dietary considerations. The diet should be nutritious and without restrictions except in the patient with congestive heart failure, whose fluid and sodium intake should be restricted. Potassium supplementation may be necessary because of the mineralocorticoid effect of corticosteroid and the diuretics, if used. Finally, let us dwell a bit further on the preventive strategies for coronary heart diseases. 11.4 Prevention of coronary heart diseases. In view of the steep rise in the incidence of chronic degenerative coronary heart diseases, several programs have been formulated to reduce their incidence. The most important organizations programs which have contributed significantly include World Health Organization and National Cholesterol Education Program. Some key aspects which have been propounded in all scientific auras pertaining to prevention of CHD and must comprise the counseling sessions are being elucidated in our subsequent discussions. Since excessive consumption of alcohol is a risk factor for cardiac heart diseases, consumption of alcohol should be strictly monitored. The information guidelines presented in the section above, we hope would go a long way in helping you plan, counsel patients suffering from coronary heart diseases. In this section, we learnt about the etiology, symptoms, and management of a decompensated heart disease, which is frequently found among the elderly. We also briefed ourselves on rheumatic heart disease, which generally affects our pediatric population. Attempting the Check Your Progress exercise will help you in recapitulating and giving a better understanding of these disease conditions. 11.5 Let us sum up. In this unit, we learnt about their etiological factors, metabolic alterations, clinical manifestations, and dietary management of the disease of heart. Cardiovascular diseases, hypertension, dyslipidemia, atherosclerosis, myocardial infarction, congestive cardiac failure, and RHD are a group of cardiac diseases about which we had discussed briefly in this unit. Finally, we focused on the various dietary recommendations proposed by WHO for the prevention of heart diseases, as well as dietary guidelines of the American Heart Association, AHP. Thank you for watching. We will see you